natural fabric dyeing. The process of taking plant material from our environment, extracting their color, and transferring it to fabric or yarn is a really fun thing to learn and experiment with. I started playing around with this about 3 years ago now, and since then I've learned a ton, because in some ways this seems like a hidden and somewhat guarded world. So in this video I want to cover what you need to know to get started with natural dyeing. What exactly do you need? How complicated is this? And what can you expect? As well as much more. I am not saying I'm an expert, although I have dyed a fair amount of fabric at this point, and I'm telling you, if this idea appeals to you, most likely you'll love it even more once you get started. And just a quick note, make sure to save swatches of your experiments and mark out what you did. Use a notebook and just make little notes. It's fun to have and so useful as you keep going, to be able to look back to see what worked, what didn't work, not to mention the results using one plant one year might be looking different the next year. Okay, so you decided you want to do this. It does take a fair amount of time. I really look at this as a lifestyle. There's not a lot of constant hands-on time, but there are just like something you may do over a weekend where you check on things every now and then. So you need to kind of just be around for a bunch of this, but you can do other things at the same time. And since this is a rather long process, if you're going to go through the trouble of doing this, it is important to prepare the fabric to some extent, because you don't want it all to be in vain once you wash them. So, what do you need? A dedicated pot. I use a huge aluminum one because that's what I had on hand. Stainless steel is great. The bigger, the better. Something to look out for at the thrift store, for example, because once you start using this pot, it is no longer safe for food. So just turn this into your dedicated dye pot. You also need a scale. Any scale will do, but you need to measure things out. You obviously need fabric, 100% natural fabric. I like cotton or linen, or like a blend of those. I haven't tried hemp or silk or wool, but those are great options as well. You want to stay away from anything synthetic. Now, to start with, we need to wash the fabric or scour it. Although to be honest, most of the time I just wash my fabric on hot in the washer. But if you want to be really thorough, you need to scour or boil the fabric in a pot with soda ash or washing soda, as well as a mild detergent like Synthropol or a pH natural soap. For some things, you are ready at this point once you have scoured or washed fabric. But for most other things, you'll need to do the following steps. First of all, tannins. Now, tannins will help the metal mordant to bind better later on and improve color depth and fastness. This is important, however, it is not 100% necessary. You will still get relatively lasting color without this step. Sometimes I skip it. Not every time, but just something to keep in mind. So what does this mean, like add tannins? Where can you find tannins? Well, you can buy a tannin source, like a powder, such as oak gall powder or myrobalan. I don't know how you pronounce that, myrobalan. You can also extract your own tannins from acorns or sumac leaves or walnut hulls or even black tea. Some things will add more color than others to your fabric. And sometimes this is good because you might want to have a darker starting point when you start to dye, and sometimes you do not want that. And you can also control the darkness somewhat with different amounts of tannins. For example, I like to extract my own, but then again, it's not super scientific. We'll do the same thing with sumac, which I've used a bunch of times. Sometimes I use oak gall powder, which I buy. And then I add about 5 to 10% tannin by weight of fabric. Dry fabric, that is. Don't wet your fabric before you weigh it. And for this process, I just start with hot water, like from the tap, or you can heat it up. Then I dissolve the tannins, like the powder, then add my fabric and let it submerge a couple of hours or overnight. And this you can let dry at this point or continue to what I think is the most important step to prepare your fabric, and that is mordanting. I use aluminum sulfate for mordanting. It's a relatively affordable option and it's easy to do. However, it's not the only option. There are lots of different ways you can mordant fabric, and that's a whole other thing to go into. So the process here is similar to that one for the tannins. I add 10 to 15% of the weight of fabric of alum to hot water, and I just use hot tap water. And then I submerge my wet fabric. You move it around a bit, make sure it's fully submerged, and then add a weight or something, because you don't want parts of the fabric to kind of stick up, because those you will get uneven results later on. So cover and let sit for like 12 to 24 hours. Now you can reuse a mordanting bath, just heat it up and add a little bit more alum to add more fabric. Either way, after this you can either dry the fabric and put it away for when you're ready to dye, or you can get started. Now when it comes to dyeing, I get a big pot of water and first wet my fabric. This is some I prepared a while ago. It has both tannins and mordants. Then I'm also adding some fabric that has just been mordanted, no tannins. And I'm cutting them up in smaller pieces. I usually do about half-yard sections or smaller. It's easier to move them around in the pot if they're not too big, I think. I get them out of the pot and now add my plant material. This is very early yarrow. 2 years ago I did yarrow and got a beautiful green color, so ever since then I've been wanting to do it again. So I picked some a couple of days ago as well that I dried, so combining some freshly picked and some half dried. And this is a great method if you can't gather enough material in one shot. You can pick some, dry, and then combine with some fresh stuff, so you have more to work with. So we have beautiful crisp greens to start, adding some more water, and it takes a while to get this amount of water to get up to just below simmer. This has been going for a little while, but still no color in the water. I like to stir every now and then and keep an eye on things. Do not boil the plants. Really watch that heat. It can really affect the color you get if you bring the heat up too high. It can break it down. Now I keep the lid on for the most part because it's starting to really smell in here. And as you play with different plants, you'll realize just how much some things can smell. Yarrow is very particular. It's not great, although it's not horrible either. For example, juniper needles and branches, which I really liked for color, but it was not a great smell. Acorns smell fine, kind of interesting, very woodsy. Avocado pits smell nice. Some plants are just plain weird. After about an hour and a half of extracting color from the plants, I'm adding my first piece of fabric. You can also strain out the plant material first if you'd like, but I often keep it in, thinking I'm trying to extract as much as possible. So make sure to remove any air pockets. It's kind of like we're making an herb broth here. And I like to kind of move the fabric around quite a bit, especially initially. I let it sit in this heat for at least an hour. And then often some sort of on-off situation whenever I'm around, where I turn the heat back up and then I shut it off, that kind of thing. After about an hour, I'm adding my remaining fabric. And this is just kind of to test things. You can see the one with the tannins is just much darker now when it's wet. This is about 1.5, maybe 2 yards. That's about as much as I can fit in this pot. So this is the color of the liquid after about 2 to 3 hours of the plant material in water. Now as you play with different plants, sometimes you get a really strong color and you're like, whoa. And other times it's more like, meh, eh. This time it's not the strongest, it's quite pale, but we got something. So I'm getting ready to leave for the night. So I make sure I cover everything so no fabric is like sticking out, because then you'll get light spots. Also make sure the heat is off and then cover. The next day, check everything. It's definitely a bit darker. So now it's time to rinse, to remove the cooked yarrow and let the fabric dry. It's quite funny. This color I got, it doesn't resemble the green I got last time I used yarrow at all. Completely different. But different time of year maybe, different fabric. At this point, let the fabric dry, not in direct sunlight, and then give it at least a couple of days before you wash it. It's almost like when you get a stain on your clothing, it's important to soak or wash that piece right away to get the stain out. Same thing here, but reverse. Let the color completely set. Now after a few days, or even better a few weeks, and you do want to wash the fabric, the color will still be affected in some cases. And when you wash your dyed fabric, I would do it either on cold or on warm. I wouldn't go too hot. Dealing with like naturally dyed fabric is just a little different from other types of fabric. And you know, as you just kind of use it and experiment, you get a feel for things. What you can use to dye depends entirely on your environment. And the process will be similar, but not identical with all things. Now you can either use plant material in your surrounding. Some of my favorites include butterfly bush, marigold flowers, the bark of some fruit trees, yellow rod flower, acorns. You can use some herbs like lavender or rosemary. I would do research on plants you come across. And a tip if you're unsure, AI, you know, like ChatGPT or whatever, is a great resource here for asking questions. You can also use things from the kitchen, like avocado pits and skins, pomegranate skins, onion skins, etc. Personally, I like to save all of my avocado pits and skins in the freezer in a bag until I've collected maybe 20 or 30. And then I make a big bath, and you can get pretty great pink and mauve colors doing it this way. So if you're using plant material, the key thing to keep in mind is you actually need quite a bit. It's amazing how much you need if you want decent results. This does depend like on the plant, but ideally pick however much you can get and have a big pot. And this is also like where you really can start playing around a bit. You can do several dips where you start with a piece of fabric and then let that soak for an hour, and then you can add another piece as the solution becomes weaker and create like a gradient shade. Although in order to do that, you really need to have a pretty strong dye solution in the first place. Or you can dye several pieces of fabric the same amount of time, but then once you're ready, you can add some rust in some water and alter the color a bit. And the rust I'm using here is just like steel wool that I've absorbed in vinegar. Use a plastic container for this. And you know, if you prepare this like a few weeks ahead of time, and iron is really fun to play with. You can also buy iron powder. But depending on how much you add or how long you let the fabric soak, you can really get a lot of fun gradients. And usually it shifts to more green and kind of grayish colors. Another thing I like to do is to dye several pieces of fabric the same color. And then later on I use them in indigo baths in different time frames to create different kinds of greens or violets, etc. from my initial yellow or pinkish colors. There are a ton of ways you can modify color, going like the other route with vinegars and things like that. Now, iron is definitely the easiest, I think, and sometimes you can get really strong results. Like here I got a very dark gray after first dyeing with acorns. Although the next year, my acorns didn't provide nearly as much color. So I found that things are rarely exactly the same. This world is just such a fun world to experiment with. There's so many different ways to go. And then of course you have the next fun step in using your fabrics. So let me know if you have any questions. Make sure to subscribe to this channel for more kind of creative pursuits and endeavors, including fabric dyeing, but not limited to that. Thanks for watching. Bye.